There is a quiet truth about the human heart, one that reveals itself not in moments of comfort, but in moments of absence, when someone who once ran from depth suddenly finds themselves surrounded by silence. They begin to hear echoes they once ignored. The avoidant walks away believing they have preserved their freedom. They convince themselves that distance is strength, that detachment is control, and that avoiding emotional intensity is wisdom. But what they fail to understand is this: you cannot reject depth without also rejecting meaning. The empath by nature brings light into hidden places. They see beyond masks, beyond fear, beyond the walls carefully constructed over time. And while this kind of love feels overwhelming to the avoidant, it is also the very thing that awakens their soul. Yet instead of embracing it, they retreat, not because it is wrong, but because it is real, and reality demands surrender. Time passes, the noise of distraction fades, and in that stillness, something begins to stir. The avoidant starts to notice what is missing, not just a person, but a presence, a warmth, a depth of connection that cannot be replicated by surface-level interactions. They search for it in others, but it feels incomplete, diluted, absent, because what they lost was not ordinary. There is a divine principle at work here. What is genuine cannot be replaced. It can only be recognized. And recognition often comes through loss. The empath gave without calculation. They loved without conditions. They offered understanding without judgment. They offered understanding without judgment. These are not common qualities. They are sacred gifts. And when such a gift is rejected, life does not simply replace it. It teaches. The avoidant begins to feel a quiet regret, not always loud or obvious, but persistent. It whispers in moments of solitude. It appears in the spaces where connection should exist, but doesn't. And slowly they begin to understand. Peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of emotion. It is the presence of truth. What they once called too much was actually depth. What they labeled as overwhelming was actually sincerity. And what they ran from was the very thing capable of transforming them. But here is the deeper lesson, one rooted in wisdom beyond human patterns. Not all realizations lead to restoration. Sometimes awareness arrives after the door has closed, not as punishment but as growth, because every soul must learn to recognize value before it is gone. The empath moves forward not in bitterness but in alignment. They do not chase what withdraws. They do not beg for what cannot receive them. Instead, they trust that what is meant for them will meet them with equal openness. And the avoidant, they are left with a mirror, a reflection of what they feared, what they lost, and what they must now learn to become if they ever wish to experience that kind of connection again. This is not a story of blame. It is a story of awakening. Because in the end, the lesson is simple, yet profound. You do not miss what was ordinary. You miss what was real. There is a subtle paradox within those who avoid emotional closeness. They long for connection, yet instinctively pull away from the very depth that could fulfill that longing. This inner conflict is not always conscious. It is often rooted in past experiences, unprocessed fears, or a belief that vulnerability leads to loss of control. So when they encounter someone who feels deeply, someone who connects beyond the surface, it stirs something unfamiliar within them. An empath does not engage in shallow interaction. They listen beyond words, feel beyond actions, and respond from a place of genuine emotional presence. This kind of connection does not merely exist on the surface. It reaches into the emotional core. For someone who has spent years mastering the art of detachment, this can feel overwhelming, not because it is harmful, but because it disrupts their internal balance, their sense of safety built on distance. Instead of recognizing this as an opportunity for growth, the avoidant often interprets it as a threat. They may label the intensity as too much, or convince themselves that they need space to maintain their independence. In truth, what they are resisting is not the person, but the depth of feeling being awakened within them. It is unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliarity can feel unsafe. So they withdraw, they create distance, they return to what feels manageable, controlled interactions, limited emotional exposure, and relationships that do not demand vulnerability. In doing so, they believe they are protecting themselves. But something remains. Even after the separation, there is a quiet imprint left behind. The empath's presence lingers, not in a dramatic or intrusive way, but as a memory of something profoundly different. It is the memory of being seen without effort, understood without explanation, and accepted without condition. These are experiences that do not easily fade because they are not common. Over time, as the avoidant continues through life, they may encounter many interactions that feel easy, light, and uncomplicated. Yet beneath that ease, there is often a subtle emptiness. A sense that something is missing, though it cannot always be clearly defined. And in moments of stillness, when distractions are no longer present, that missing piece begins to take shape. It is then that they start to realize the depth they once avoided was not a burden, but a rare kind of connection that touched something real within them. And what once felt overwhelming begins to be understood as meaningful. The empathist's gift lies in their extraordinary capacity to understand without judgment, to feel without conditions, and to hold space for another's emotions without attempting to fix, control, or escape them. This is a rare form of presence that is almost spiritual in its depth, and it is precisely what an avoidant often fails to recognize in the moment. To the avoidant, this kind of unconditional understanding can feel unfamiliar, intense, or even uncomfortable, because it demands a level of emotional honesty they are not used to giving or receiving. When the empathist first enters their life, the avoidant may sense the depth of their insight, but misinterpret it as pressure. They may convince themselves that they are being scrutinized, that their vulnerabilities are unsafe, or that their freedom is at risk. In reality, the empath is simply being present, fully and authentically. They do not seek to control or judge, and yet their very authenticity exposes the avoidant to feelings and truths they have long avoided. This is what makes the connection both terrifying and transformative. The tragedy is that avoidants often respond by pulling away rather than leaning in. They may suppress the very feelings that the empath awakens, rationalize their distance, or disengage entirely, believing that they are protecting themselves. But this disengagement does not erase the impact of what they have experienced. The empath has offered a mirror to their soul, a reflection of what it feels like to be truly known and accepted. While the avoidant may temporarily ignore this, the imprint of that unconditional understanding remains, quietly shaping their awareness in ways they cannot yet name. Over time, the avoidant may find themselves encountering other relationships that lack the same depth or compassion. No matter how charming or convenient these connections may appear, they feel incomplete, hollow, or unsatisfying. The empath's presence cannot be replicated by surface-level interactions or conditional affections. The avoidant comes to realize, often too late, that they have lost access to a rare and transformative kind of love. One that saw them complete, embraced their flaws, and met their humanity with grace. This recognition often emerges not in the moment of the relationship, but in its absence. What was once undervalued becomes unforgettable. The avoidant may begin to long for the understanding they once rejected, to yearn for the presence that allowed them to feel truly safe. And it is only then that they begin to grasp the power of unconditional empathy, not as something to escape, but as something that, once lost, can never be fully replaced. Distance has a way of sharpening perception. When someone is no longer present in our lives, the mind begins to fill the spaces they once occupied with reflection, memory, and clarity. For the avoidant, who once recoiled from the intensity of an empath's presence, this absence is not empty. It is instructive. What they once dismissed or avoided now becomes a source of subtle longing, a realization that the connection they ran from held more meaning than they could see at the time. In the moment of relationship, the avoidant often perceives the empath's depths as overwhelming. They may feel pressured by the honesty, intensity, or emotional availability that the empath naturally offers. In response, they create distance, believing that retreat is protection. Yet the very act of stepping back does not erase the experience of being truly seen. Instead, it leaves an imprint that grows in significance precisely because it is now absent. As days, weeks, or months pass, the avoidant begins to notice the spaces left behind. They encounter moments that trigger memories of the empathy, patience, and understanding that were once freely given. In quieter times, they may reflect on conversations where the empath understood without judgment, moments where they felt accepted fully for who they were, flaws and all. These are not experiences that can be replicated easily. They are the markers of a rare connection. Distance allows the avoidant to see the contrast between the ordinary interactions of daily life and the extraordinary presence they once rejected. Others may offer convenience, distraction, or superficial connection, but none match the depth, intuition, and unwavering compassion of the empath they pushed away. In the absence of the empath, what seemed like intensity is now recognized as insight, what felt like pressure is now understood as care, and what was once avoided is now missed profoundly. The lessons that distance brings are subtle but transformative. It is not merely the absence of the empath that affects the avoidant. It is the growing awareness of the value they once rejected. Space cultivates reflection, and reflection awakens understanding. They begin to grasp the unique way the empath held the unique way the empath held them emotionally, providing a sense of completeness that they cannot manufacture on their own. Through this clarity, the avoidant confronts a truth they may have denied during the relationship. Some connections are not meant to be measured by comfort or convenience, but by the depth of presence they inspire, and when that presence is gone, the void left behind speaks louder than any words ever could, revealing the profound impact of what they once had and now cannot reclaim. Avoidants often equate peace with the absence of intensity, believing that a calm exterior and minimal emotional engagement represent stability and contentment. They prize detachment, predictability, and control, convincing themselves that avoiding emotional depth safeguards their well-being. Yet this perception is deceptive. What they call peace is often a quiet emptiness, a life stripped of the richness that only profound connection can bring. The empath, with their unwavering capacity for understanding and emotional resonance, exposes the subtle discrepancy between true fulfillment and superficial tranquility. During the relationship, the avoidant may have misread the empath's emotional depth as a threat. They might have interpreted vulnerability as pressure or sincerity as intensity, retreating in an effort to preserve what they believed was inner peace. In doing so, they failed to recognize that the empathist was not a source of chaos, but a mirror reflecting the very vitality of emotional life. The very qualities that frightened them, openness, compassion, and emotional attunement, were the gateways to connection, not the walls to contain it. When the empath is gone, the avoidant is left to confront what their so-called peace has cost them. In solitude, the absence of this deep connection becomes impossible to ignore. Life continues, relationships unfold, and yet nothing replicates the authenticity, patience, and insight the empath provided. They begin to sense that the calm they once sought was hollow, a temporary illusion that never nurtured the soul. True peace, they realize, is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of understanding, trust, and mutual resonance, qualities the empath offered effortlessly. The paradox becomes clear. The avoidant fled from intensity, only to discover that what they truly desired could not exist without it. The very thing they rejected as overwhelming was in fact the vessel through which emotional fulfillment was possible. The absence of the empath forces them to face this truth with stark clarity. No distractions, no casual encounters, no surface-level interactions can replicate the depth they once dismissed. The realization often strikes gradually as subtle regrets accumulate, until the emptiness left behind becomes undeniable. In this way, avoidance teaches a bitter yet invaluable lesson. It reveals that evading vulnerability may create temporary comfort, but it cannot replace the richness of a soul connection that nurtures growth, understanding, and genuine intimacy. The avoidant comes to understand that true peace is not a static state devoid of emotion. It is the harmony that emerges when two hearts meet with authenticity and acceptance. Only in absence does the contrast become undeniable, illuminating the profound void left by what was once rejected. Growth often arrives through loss, and for the avoidant, this truth is especially profound. During the relationship, they may have dismissed or fled from the empath's presence, misunderstanding depth for pressure, or vulnerability for constraint. In the moment, the empath's unwavering capacity to feel, to understand, and to nurture may have seemed overwhelming. The avoidant, seeking to maintain control and preserve a sense of safety, withdraws, often believing that they are choosing freedom. Yet what they do not realize is that growth is rarely attained in comfort. It is forged in reflection, absence, and the slow recognition of what was once overlooked. When the empath is gone, the avoidant is confronted with a quiet, persistent truth. What they rejected was not merely a person, but a mirror of their own potential to experience profound connection. The lessons that accompany this loss are subtle at first. An ache of absence, a longing for the understanding that cannot be replicated, or a sense of emptiness despite the distractions of life. These experiences awaken reflection. They force the avoidant to confront patterns they may have ignored, the habit of retreating, the tendency to protect themselves at the expense of intimacy, and the misconception that depth is something to be a princeps, and the misconception that depth is something to be a prey, voided rather than embraced. Loss is transformative because it removes the distractions and defenses that once masked reality. In the empath's absence, the avoidant is no longer able to rely on detachment as a shield. The clarity of what has been lost illuminates both the gift they rejected and the areas within themselves that require growth. They begin to understand that emotional depth, vulnerability, and connection are not threats, but essential aspects of the human experience, qualities they can cultivate within themselves and recognize in others in the future. This awakening does not always lead to reconciliation, and it does not always reverse past choices. Instead, it serves as a teacher, revealing the consequences of avoidance and the irreplaceable value of authentic presence. It is in the quiet reflection, the internal reckoning, and the recognition of what was once taken for granted that the avoidant experiences the seeds of transformation. Ultimately, loss becomes a catalyst for awareness. The avoidant may come to see that love, understanding, and empathy are not abundant in the world. They are rare gifts, and once rejected, they leave a void that cannot easily be filled. Through this void, growth emerges, teaching the avoidant not only about the depth of the empath they lost, but also about the depth within themselves that they had yet to embrace. In reflecting on these truths, we come to understand a profound principle. Life has a way of showing us the value of what we once overlooked. The avoidant may have fled from the depth, misunderstood the intensity, or resisted the love freely given by the empath, but absence, reflection, and clarity reveal what words alone could never convey. True connection is not measured by convenience, comfort, or ease. It is measured by presence, authenticity, and the courage to meet another soul fully. Let this serve as a reminder to honor those who see us deeply, who love without condition, and who awaken parts of ourselves that we may not yet understand. Do not take for granted the rare gifts of empathy, compassion, and emotional presence. In embracing these qualities, we cultivate growth within ourselves and create space for relationships that enrich, transform, and endure. Thank you for allowing yourself to reflect, to learn, and to witness these insights. May this awareness inspire deeper connection, greater understanding, and the courage to recognize and honor what is truly precious in the hearts around you. Goodbye, and may your journey be guided by wisdom, compassion, and the unwavering light of authenticity.